My name is Seth McDivitt, and this is my beginning speech for basic communication. Riddles are integral to the plot of The Hobbit. J.R.R. Tolkien loves riddles. And we know this because of our understanding of his background in his study of languages, philology, also his love for Anglo-Saxon literature. Riddles play a huge part in Anglo-Saxon literature, also in Celtic literature. English and Old English word forms were Tolkien's specialty. And these riddles, interpreting them well and our understanding of Tolkien and his love of them, helps us understand a deeper meaning or pointing to a deeper meaning in The Hobbit. Adam Roberts, in his book on these riddles, it's called The Riddles of the Hobbit, proposes alternate answers to these riddles than the ones given in the book. And we don't have time to go through them all, but the initial point is this. Riddles in The Hobbit are used as a way to conceal, to reveal. And this knowledge of that about Tolkien will help us to interpret The Hobbit accurately. That is what we all do when we read. We all interpret texts. A text, by definition, is from the past. It's from it might be from the same culture that we in, but most likely those popular books from other cultures we see later on. The point that I will get to is that practicing crossing that boundary between our culture and another culture, even if it's not just scripture, will help us interpret accurately. So exposing ourselves to word patterns and literary structures that are different in eras and languages will help us more easily access the Bible's meaning. Let's talk about the kenning. The kenning, also mentioned in Adam Roberts' first book, is an Anglo-Saxon word form. It's got a really detailed definition, but it's easier to understand in examples. So one example of a kenning, the Anglo-Saxons would put two words together instead of just using the word for ocean. So a simple indicative, ocean. They would call it a whale road or a gannet's bath. A sword in Anglo-Saxon literature is sometimes described as a wound hoe. There are even double kennings, so double additions of words. Glimdrapa is a double kenning for warrior. It means feeder of the war gull, and a war gull is itself a kenning for raven. So a warrior is a feeder of ravens on the battlefield. That makes perfect sense. This feature of their language is shaped by a love for riddles and riddling speech. And Tolkien's love for Anglo-Saxon myth and his love of these languages affects how we might interpret his use of the riddle. This word form and practice conceals in order to reveal. In that sense, it's incredibly similar to another story form that we might have opportunity to interpret, the parable. The parable is a story form meant to convey revelatory knowledge to a group that has ears and eyes to see it. MacArthur's definition is it's an elongated simile or metaphor with a distinctly spiritual lesson contained in the analogy. He says a parable extends the comparison into a longer story or more complex metaphor, and the meaning, always a point of spiritual truth, is not necessarily obvious. That's from MacArthur's book on parables, the mysteries of God's kingdom revealed through the stories of Jesus. That's published by Thomas Nelson. But parables are not moral fables. They use pedestrian language. In Luke 15, we have a triptych, or three parables offered. The first is about a shepherd who leaves the flock to save one lost sheep. The second is about a woman who loses a coin, searches for it, and rejoices when she finds it. And the third is about two wayward sons who are wayward for very different reasons, but both are loved by their father. The context of all of these three stories is a growing discontent among the Pharisees, but also among the people. They wanted Jesus to rise up and take power, and he wouldn't. This story form, the parable, doesn't really exist with a modern equivalent. The novel developed out of the world of skepticism and growing interest in psychology, and we are left without a bridge between our cultural use of story and the ancient parable. So the point is that practice makes perfect. We do not have a corresponding literary equivalent to the parable, but we do have the ability to practice crossing that cultural bridge. The act of interpretation requires that we do this, and that act of interpretation is a lot like a muscle. learning about deeper and concealed meaning in the kenning or in a riddle will help us cross that cultural bridge. They don't have to directly correspond to interpreting parables, but they do afford us a chance to span the cultural differences and come to a correct interpretation. Christians have trouble with this kind of interpretation because they are not exercised in literary forms. It's not common to find that in high school or in public education anymore. And even in college, we see an abandoning of a liberal arts education for an extended job training type college education, undergraduate degree. But by reading, by interpreting, by exposing ourselves to different literary forms and training, we can ourselves bridge that cultural gap between our culture and another. And when we come back to Scripture, we will be much better prepared to interpret those odd and sometimes perplexing literary forms. Thank you.